Excuse me, Ivo, but does Duncan seem rather down today? Barely said a word when I was shunting here this morning. That's not like him.
It's not you, Jeff. He just got some bad news.
Oh, what happened?
It's his favorite comedian. He passed away.
Do not give me that.
What?
That softy, sad sap way of putting it. He didn't pass away, he died. That's what happened.
Hold on. Who's he? That comedian fellow Ivo mentioned?
His name was George Carlin. He had some heart problems last year and...
I'm sorry.
For what? It's not your fault he died.
How did you come to know this George Carlin, Duncan? Did he visit here?
It's a bit of a tale.
I've got a bit of time. I need to wait for Tornado to pass with the express.
Well, it all started a wee bit over a decade ago.
It had been a fine day in the spring of 1998, although you wouldn't have thought it had you listened to Duncan. He had been hard at work all day and was in a hurry to get back to his shed and have a rest. As he joined the other engines in the shed, some workmen were having a rest of their own nearby. They had hooked up a television and were watching a stand-up comedian doing his routine. Duncan's driver chuckled as he recognised the performer.
Get a load of this, Duncan.
Ugh, a lot of what now? Have I not heard enough already today?
Just listen.
In a little while. In a little while. Well, it'll just be a little while. That's a wonderful one. I just love that. It sounds so benign. Just a little while. Couldn't hurt you, could it? You can wait a little while. It'll only be a little while longer. Just a little while. That's so different from a short time. Short time. Sounds almost terminal, doesn't it? You only have a short time. Whereas you have a little while. Oh, I'd rather have a little while than a short time.
Duncan found himself oddly enthralled by the man.
Who is that?
Oh, that's George Carlin. He's a comedian from the United States.
I don't see what's so funny about him.
I can only stand him so long. You may not hear it from him now, but that man has the dirtiest mouth on the telly. So much so that he was arrested for it.
And even when he isn't cursing, he's constantly complaining. It's almost all he ever seems to do.
Shameful, that's what it is.
Oh, lighten up, you lot. He's alright.
And I wonder why there's no blue food. Where the is the blue food?
See what I mean? The man is hopeless.
Oh, for the love of...
And don't say blueberries, well, you know they're purple. You look at a blueberry and you see that sucker's purple. Blue cheese? No. Blue cheese is just white cheese with a bunch of mold in it.
Duncan roared with laughter. The workmen joined in a moment later. They found Duncan's reaction almost as priceless as the show itself.
So he's foul-mouthed and complains a lot. It's not hard to see why Duncan likes him.
Duncan thought George Carlin was wonderful and didn't care what the other engines thought.
Those brutes don't get it.
He said to himself.
That man tells it like it is, no matter who doesn't want to hear it.
From time to time, he'd get to see another show.
That's, pardon me? What? Louder? Is the Louder family here? They follow me everywhere. They've been in every city I've ever appeared in. They just sit there and yell their name. Louder! Yes, I know. This is the Los Angeles Louder.
Alright, I'll admit that one was funny.
As time went on, George Carlin's comedy grew on the other engines.
I'm getting in the plane. let Evel Knievel get on the plane, I'll be in here with you folks in uniform. There seems to be less wind in here.
They started to get it and lightened up.
In your own words. People say that to you. You know, when you hear that a lot in a classroom or in a courtroom, they'll say to you, tell us in your own words. Do you have your own words? Hey, I'm using the ones everybody else has been using. Next time they tell you to say something in your own words, say, Nick Flat Blarney Quando Flew.
Over time, Duncan watched Carlin grow greyer and slower and shorter.
Now, you wouldn't know it from some of the things I've said over the years, but I like people. I do.
In his years on the railway, Duncan had seen this happen to more than a few people.
Never mind. People last so long nowadays, it'll be ages before that happens.
Duncan said to himself, but he was only half right. Soon, a new millennium dawned, and Duncan was working just as hard as ever. Most of the world had abandoned steam railways, but the engines of Sodor were determined to prove their worth, until the end of time, if they had to. One morning, in 2009, Duncan and Renaeus had been waiting in the sheds.
I hear Miss Hat's doing well as a new Fat controller.
Yes, James was saying they're rather pleased.
You mean they're relieved? That Norman Spencer sounded like a...
Nasty piece of work?
Pighead idiot. He wasn't a piece of work, he was a man. Nasty piece of work could mean anything.
I take your point. You know, that sounded a bit like George Carlin.
I suppose so.
As Renaeus went to get a drink, Duncan found himself deep in thought. It had been a while since he'd heard anything from the American comedian. A moment later, his driver arrived.
Driver, there's something I've been wondering.
What would that be, Duncan?
That comedian, George Carlin. Has he done any shows of late? I've not heard any more of him recently.
Duncan's driver glanced down. Then, he answered Duncan's question.
That was this morning.
I understand.
At that moment, a whistle sounded out. Tornado blew past with the express, bringing his train into the station. He was soon on his way again.
Looks like my line's clear. Thank you for telling me your story, Duncan.
For the rest of that day, Duncan performed his duties with barely a word. The other engines gave him space. Although they didn't fully understand what Duncan had seen in George Carlin, they knew he had meant a lot to their friend. When it was time to turn in for the evening, Duncan was still glum. Just as he was leaving, Duncan's driver remembered something which he hoped would cheer the little engine up.
You know what, Duncan? I think George Carlin liked you too.
What? Now what would a man like him know of an engine like me?
Wait and see.
As his driver departed, Duncan could only wonder what he was talking about. Duncan and his driver were supposed to have the next day off, but much to Duncan's surprise, his driver greeted him the next morning. Then, he noticed his driver's granddaughter was there too.
Hello, Claire.
Hello, Duncan. Grandpa told me you were feeling down. I'd like to help.
Hey, well, thank you. But I can't see how.
Duncan, do you remember that children's television program? The one based on the stories the thin clergyman wrote about you engines.
You mean that kids show with the wee models of us? Sure. I've never really cared much for him myself. I don't know why they made me orange and ugly, or why they named the whole thing after that Thomas. That just makes him sound more important than the rest of us. You'd think he was the king of the railway.
Well, Claire loves it, but never mind that, Duncan. Have you ever seen it with the American narration?
American narration? I didn't know there was one. Thomas the Yank Engine, is it?
Thomas the Yank Engine.
With that, Claire hopped up onto Duncan's buffer. After opening up the laptop, she brought up one of the older episodes with the American narration. As the episode began, Duncan heard a familiar voice.
Scarloey, the little engine, loves all the sights and sounds along his line and knows them very well.
It's him!
This made Duncan's day. Now, Duncan wanted to see all the episodes George Carlin had narrated. He had a new appreciation for the show and liked seeing the models.
I suppose the clock will be happy to be fixed. At least as happy as Trevor was after they fixed him up. Then again, Trevor wasn't completely happy.
That's so.
Absolutely so. But I'll have to start at the beginning if you want to hear about it.
He enjoyed hearing the voices George gave them, even him.
I speak as I find. Tunnels should be tunnels and not rabbit holes. This railway is no good at all.
One morning, about a week later, the Thin Controller came to see Duncan. He explained that Duncan's brother on the Tallyflynn Railway had been repainted to look like him.
I was wondering, would you like to be painted in his livery? Dark green with black and yellow lining?
That would be... Actually, now that you mention it, I have a different livery in mind.
Duncan said, and he explained his idea.
Well, we could do that if that's what you want.
Thank you, sir.
The Thin Controller made some arrangements. That night, Duncan went into the workshop. A couple of nights later, the engines were resting after a long day.
Oh, I hope Duncan's alright. He's been in the works for a couple of days now.
I don't think there's anything to worry about, Rusty. What I've been told, he's only getting repainted.
But Grandpuff, a repaint doesn't usually take this long.
It's taken a while, Peter Sam, because Duncan has received a new livery.
Evening, sir. What do you mean he's received a new livery? Is he ready?
Duncan steamed into the sheds. The other engines blinked in astonishment. Resplendent in a coat of yellow paint, Duncan looked as though he'd been lifted straight from the cover of a Thomas & Friends DVD.
Oh my! That's,
rather bright.
Is this going to be a permanent change?
Not really, no.
Duncan will just be wearing this paint for a short time.
Actually, sir, I'd like to think I'll be wearing this for a little while.
The Thin Controller frowned. Then, he remembered who had inspired Duncan's new livery.
Ah, yes. For a little while, then.
With that, the Thin Controller departed. As he did so, the other engines looked closely at Duncan. Although his new livery would take a bit of getting used to, they could understand why he'd chosen it. That, they all thought, was something they could not argue with.
There you have it, Adeline. The full story behind this Carlin yellow paint of mine.
Thank you for sharing that, Duncan. Mr. Carlin's philosophy really did resonate with you. I can see that he meant a lot to you.
Meant? He still does. I mean, I'm still wearing this color in his honor.
So it's still not a permanent livery then, Duncan?
You're one to talk.
Well, I never said my new livery was temporary.
Aye, that's true. But there's nothing as permanent as a temporary change, Duke. You of all engines should know that. How long did they say you'd be sheeted in that shed?
Yes, well, circumstances change.
Exactly. You know, they said the same thing when they took my tender away, that it'd only be gone for a wee while.
I don't remember you having a tender, for what that's worth.
Well, it's not just you, Adeline. I don't remember that either.
Oh, it was just before I came here. Doesn't matter now. I'm used to it. Anyway, what brings you here, driver? We're not due out for another half hour or so.
I've got something to watch while we're waiting.
Is it what I think it is?
Indeed. Duke, Adeline, you don't mind, do you? I suppose not.
May I watch too? Which one is it?
Carlin on campus.
Some things break easy, don't they? Some things just come right off. Radio knobs in a car. God, they're fragile. Just trying to tune something in. Just trying to find something you can tolerate.
I never understood those noises he makes there.
Oh, it's how they used to have to tune car radios back in those days, turning a knob until you found what you wanted.
I'll admit he's good at those sound effects.
And you wind up listening to something just the other side of the glove compartment.